What's up, everybody? It's Miles here from bootcamp.com, and today in pulmonology, we're going to be starting our next section of respiratory physiology that deals with how the respiratory system relates to the cardiovascular system and the blood. And today in particular, we're going to be dealing with blood and respiration basics. So like we just mentioned, the pulmonary system interacts with the cardiovascular system in the blood. So in order to understand how these connect with each other, first let's start with a bit of a circulation overview where we're going to be reviewing the body's circulation. So when reviewing circulation, I always like to start off with the left ventricle. I feel that the left ventricle is a good starting point. It's one of the main pumps of the heart. It pumps all that blood into the body. And so I like to start off in the left ventricle of the heart. And so blood is going to be pumped from the left ventricle out into the arterial system. So blood is going to be leaving the heart. And can you recall what is the first structure that blood is going to encounter after it leaves the left ventricle? That's right, it's the aorta. So the aorta is the first structure outside of the left ventricle. And so the blood is going to be pumped through the arterial system. It's going to then reach the body capillaries where it's going to be perfusing body cells. And so we're going to be talking a lot more about perfusion later on in the series. But for now, we can start to think of perfusion as the blood supply. So the body cells are receiving its blood supply from the body capillaries. And so what's included in this blood supply? Well, the blood from the body capillaries are going to be giving oxygen and nutrients to the body cells. And the body capillaries don't just provide nutrients and oxygen to the body cells, but they're also going to be washing away certain waste products. So in this venous portion here of the body capillaries, they're actually going to be receiving waste products from the cells, such as CO2, and then they're going to be washing them away into the venous system. And so from this end portion of the capillaries here, we are then going to be entering the venous system, and the venous system drains into the right atrium. And then from the right atrium, the blood is then going to be traveling into the right ventricle. And can you remember what the valve is that is between the right atrium and the right ventricle? That's right, it is the tricuspid valve. And then the right ventricle is going to be pumping blood into the pulmonary artery. And remember, this is one of the exceptions where an artery is carrying deoxygenated blood. And so then that blood from the pulmonary artery is then going to travel to the pulmonary capillaries. And remember, the pulmonary capillaries have a very close relation to those alveoli in the lungs so they can undergo gas exchange. So that high concentration of CO2 that's present in the pulmonary capillaries right now is going to be exchanged into the alveoli to get exhaled. And likewise, the oxygen that's present in the alveoli is going to exchange into the pulmonary capillaries to get brought to the body cells. And so from this end oxygenated portion of the pulmonary capillaries here, the blood is going to travel into the pulmonary vein. And remember, this is one of the exceptions where oxygenated blood is being carried by a vein. And then the pulmonary vein drains into the left atrium. And then blood is going to travel from the left atrium back into the left ventricle where we started. And can you remember what the valve was called that separates the left atrium from the left ventricle? That's right, it was the bicuspid valve, also known as the mitral valve. Okay, so now that we've done a circulation overview, we like to separate this circulation into two separate circuits. So the first is called the systemic circulation. And so it goes from the heart, from the left ventricle, to the body capillaries, and then back to the heart, back to the right atrium. So from the left ventricle to the right atrium, that's called the systemic circulation. The next circulation is called the pulmonary circulation. So that's going from the right ventricle, from the heart, all the way to the pulmonary capillaries, and then back to the heart, back to the left atrium. So from the right ventricle to the left atrium, that's called the pulmonary circulation. And one thing you have to keep in mind is the amount of blood that flows each minute through the systemic circulation or through the pulmonary circulation. So the flow per minute is equal in the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. So the amount of blood that flows through the pulmonary circulation per minute is the same amount of blood that flows through the systemic circulation per minute. And I've actually seen that come up on boards questions. So if we just think about this for a second, the systemic circulation is huge, right? It has the aorta, all of its branches, it has all of those body capillaries, it has the entire caval system, the inferior vena cava, the superior vena cava, all the hepatic veins, and so on. And so it's a massive circulation. Compared to the pulmonary circulation, which is much smaller. It has the one pulmonary artery, and then it has the few pulmonary veins. So how is there the same amount of blood flowing through this massive systemic circulation as the much smaller pulmonary circulation? And so the only way that we can move this same amount of blood through the much smaller pulmonary circulation is if the pulmonary circulation has high flow, where the blood can flow very easily. And the way that blood flows very easily through the pulmonary circulation is that it has a very low resistance to blood flow. And so these are kind of two characteristics of the pulmonary circulation. It has high flow and low resistance, and that allows it to accompany the same amount of blood per minute as the much larger systemic circulation. Okay, so now let's get into some oxygen and CO2 basics. So first, we're going to start off with oxygen intake. So as we know, the body needs oxygen. It uses it in a process called cellular respiration in order to make energy. So for physiology, what is the main pathway of oxygen that we should think about as it travels through the circulatory system? So we are going to be inhaling oxygen from the atmosphere. It's going to travel through the upper respiratory tract, down to the lungs, into the alveoli. It's going to exchange into the pulmonary capillaries, and it's going to travel from the pulmonary veins to the heart, and then from the heart to the arterial system, and then it's going to reach the body capillaries. From the body capillaries, it's going to be taken up by body cells, and then within the cell, specifically, it's going to be used by an organelle called the mitochondria, where in the mitochondria, it's going to be used in cellular respiration to make energy. And one thing to keep in the back of your mind is that 100% of the oxygen isn't going to be taken up by the body cells. Some of the oxygen is actually going to continue on to the venous system. So some oxygen will be present in the venous system, however, it will be at a much lower concentration than in the arterial system. All right, so now let's go over CO2 production. So like we just said, cellular respiration, it requires oxygen to produce energy in the form of ATP, but it is also going to be producing a byproduct called CO2 or carbon dioxide. And so that CO2 byproduct is going to be produced within the cells, and it's going to be released from the body cells into the body capillaries. Once CO2 is present in the body capillaries, it's going to drain into the venous system, back to the heart and the right atrium. It's going to go into the right ventricle, be pumped into the pulmonary circulation through the pulmonary artery until it reaches the pulmonary capillaries. From the pulmonary capillaries, it will exchange into the alveoli. It'll travel through the respiratory system and then get exhaled into the atmosphere. And again, just to note, 100% of the CO2 will not be taken up into the lungs. Some of the CO2 will continue on into the pulmonary veins and then into the arterial system. And so there will be some CO2 present in the arterial system. However, it will be at a much lower concentration compared to the venous system. All right, and that's all we got for our video on blood and respiration basics.